It says we are recording. Take it away, Martin.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Quick introduction. My name is Martin Ince. I'm the multimodal transportation planner for the city of Flagstaff. I busy myself typically with things related to pedestrians and bicyclists and foot trails. So we're here to talk today about, give a little snapshot about the current state of things in Flagstaff for pedestrians, bicyclists, and some of their safety. So I'm going to go quickly through a few slides just to give you an idea of where we are now. And I don't know, Sarah, was there an introduction you want to give for the rest of this series, or should I dive right in?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So this presentation by Martin is part of a series of snapshots that we are doing most Mondays at noon. We're actually skipping next Monday because people aren't around for the Thanksgiving holiday. You can register for any of these upcoming webinars on flagstaff.az.gov/regional plan 2045. They follow the same format of being a 15-minute presentation and a 15-minute Q&A. They are posted to the YouTube channel for the city, and they are all drafts. We are working on papers. We are in this mode of kind of digesting 180 different data points that are really important to understand before we start thinking about the future. You always start from where you are. We also, this slide didn't get updated, I can see, but the next two webinars, which start on November 29th, will focus on growth. And so we will talk about how things have changed in the last 6, 7, 8 years, how growth in our region can be characterized and what will happen going forward. We'll actually have 2 back-to-back webinars on that. So if you're interested in those topics, visit the website and sign up for the next webinar on the 29th. And with that, I'll hand it back to Martin.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so as we get started, just a kind of a reminder, there's a couple of planning processes going on with the city right now that you are all encouraged to take part in and keep track of. Flagstaff in Motion is the 5-year plan update through Mountain Line. The Active Transportation Master Plan is something I'm working on. It is essentially the plan for enhancing walking and biking in Flagstaff. We are getting just near the end of our public review process, although there is still a community survey open. And then the last one, of course, is a Regional Transportation Plan, which is led by Metro Plan. And I don't know that they've gotten the community process started in earnest, but that will be coming soon. So I think if you use your typical city contacts and however you get information from the city, you'll be seeing information about that very quickly. So if you were here last week, I think Dave talked about this slide, which under the topic of connecting people and places, and he showed you the model's projections for population density and employment density. And we have actually used this information and kind of expanded it to generate this map, which we call generators and attractors. And it takes what we saw in the previous slide, population centers, residential density, and employment numbers, and then adds a few other things. And these are essentially places that people would want to or need to walk or bike or take transit to. So they include schools, parks, transit stops, neighborhoods, employment centers, commercial areas, institutions, as well as the campuses of NAU and CCC. In a similar map, you can see here are we call social factors, and these are the places where people may be more likely to walk or bike or take transit, or may need to walk or bike or take transit. And it takes into account a couple of different populations, including elderly children, people with a disability, non-white populations, households in poverty status, households without access to a vehicle. It also looks at affordable housing sites as well as human service facilities around the community. You can see that this is what that map looks like. Both this map and the previous one we have used in our process to prioritize pedestrian and bicycle facilities. So we use these two to tell us where new facilities are needed or would be most useful. So I'll spend a few minutes talking about facilities themselves. This is the infrastructure for walking and biking. There's a series of slides here on different types of facilities. First one is sidewalks. You can see this map shows sidewalk status from blue being sidewalks on both sides, through orange, which means they're incomplete, down through red, which means there are no sidewalks on either side of the street. And Flagstaff at the moment has 300 miles of public sidewalks, but we're also missing 60 miles on our major street network. A little over half of our streets have sidewalks on both sides, but there are also 29% of streets that have no sidewalks on either side. For bike lanes, we have just under 100 miles of designated bike lanes, plus another 34 miles of shoulders. Bike lanes are present on 71% of our major streets, but we also have 70 miles that are missing. And you can see on this map in red which of those miles are missing. And you can imagine that some of these areas are fairly critical and would make it difficult to get around by bike if you rely on bike lanes for part of your trip. Foots trails we're all familiar with. It's the Flagstaff Urban Trail System. At present, we have 58 miles of trails. About half of these are paved and about half are aggregate surfaced. The master plan shows another 75 or so miles of planned new trails, illustrated here on the map. One sidebar about the Flagstaff Trails Initiative. If you're familiar with this, this is a cross-jurisdictional effort to plan for recreational trails in the area and according to its motto, bring them from good to extraordinary. And the way it fits into what we're talking about is that this sort of forms the interface between the head, bike, and trail system within the city and the system of trails around the perimeter of the city. So this talks about things like where those two systems connect, where we have trailheads, where we have points of access from the city into the forest. And it gives us an opportunity to plan that all in kind of a comprehensive and cohesive way. A few more facilities. These are crossings. So these are at grade street crossings. Right now, Flagstaff has 10 beacon crossings. These are the ones that pedestrians push a button and a light flashes, which either requires traffic to yield or to stop. We have about 59 locations identified for potential new enhanced crossings, and you can see them in red on this map. It's worth noting that about 30% of our major street intersections do not fully accommodate pedestrian crossings. So as we move forward with some of our planning, this is definitely an area to address. The final piece of infrastructure facilities are grade separated crossings, and these are simply the bridges and tunnels for the use of pedestrians and bicyclists. We have 21 existing. That includes 10 bridges or tunnels. The other 11 are really underpasses or overpasses where there's a street that goes over or under the railroad tracks to the interstate. But that street also accommodates pedestrian and bicyclists through bike lanes, sidewalks, and foot trails. And we have identified 52 locations for potential new grade separated crossings as we move forward. So I'll switch for a moment to Modeshare. Modeshare is simply the percentage of trips that are made by different modes. We typically divide it into 4 categories: automobile or vehicle, transit, walking, and biking. And this information in this slide is based on Metro Plan's 2018 trip diary survey. And it tells us that about 27% of all trips are made by walking, biking, or transit. And you can see the respective percentages there. That means that 73% of trips are made by vehicles. And we can look at trends over time. Metro Plan has done the trip diary survey now 3 times, in 2006, 2012, and 2018. And you can see the trend data in the chart on the left. The chart on the right is the 5-year rolling average from the American Community Survey. It's a little bit different in that it measures a trip to work rather than all trips. You can see generally that walking trips have increased ever so slightly since 2006, but that bike trips have declined slightly. So overall, I think I would characterize this as we've been holding steady over the last number of years with regard to Modeshare. We can put a finer point on the geography in Flagstaff. And again, this information is provided courtesy of the Trip Diary Survey. You can see that geography makes a huge difference in mode share, in that the core of Flagstaff, walk, bike, transit mode share is over half. In other words, more than half of trips in the core are made by walking, biking, or transit. And if we look out to the rest of Flagstaff, you can see that number drops to 15.6%. And then we can kind of look at the same thing by geography, but over time. And the information tells us that between 2006 and 2018, walk, bike, transit increased by 23% in the core, but decreased by 7.7% in the rest of Flagstaff. So we're really looking at kind of a tale of two Flagstaffs, where in the core, where things are being built up in kind of a way that's more dense, more compact, more mixed use, and there are good facilities, that we're increasing walk, bike, transit mode share. And that's not the story. We're not doing as well in the rest of Flagstaff. Compared to our peers, and by peers, we mean other cities in the West that have a similar population of Flagstaff and a major university. You can see all the cities here. I'm sorry if that's a little hard to read, but for walk share, Flagstaff does pretty well. We're third among our peers and well above the average. For bike share, we lag a little bit behind. We're below average slightly, and we're further down the list compared to our peers. Switching over to safety, this is an analysis of crashes involving pedestrians and bicyclists over the last 10 years. And this map shows where there are hotspots. So where the map shows up in red, that means there's a higher concentration of crashes. For pedestrian crashes, Flagstaff averages about 29 per year, but more than a quarter of these result in serious injury or death. And overall, pedestrian fatalities represent half of all traffic fatalities in Flagstaff. On the bike side, we see a few more crashes involving bikes, about 52 per year on average. We did not have a fatal bike crash between 2013 and 2020, but we've already had two in this calendar year in 2021. So that's kind of a brief snapshot. I think these typically conclude with some suggestions about where we can direct our inquiry, or more that the community should be curious about. So here we have a few things listed. First off, what accounts for the difference in trends between the core and the rest of Flagstaff? And I think that there would be a follow-up question to that, which would be, how do we make the rest of Flagstaff more like the core? Generally, how do we increase mode share? How do we get more people in transit, walking or on bikes? How do we reduce crashes? We want everybody to be safe, as well as comfortable. How does micromobility fit in? I think it's pretty obvious to all of us that there are more e-bikes present on the street. There are all kinds of other devices as well that are typically powered by electricity, and give us a great opportunity to increase mode share and get people out of vehicles. What are the relationships between modes? How do we make, for example, walking and biking work best with transit? Are there upper limits to mode share? What do the experiences in our peer communities tell us about how high we might take mode share and how far we might be able to go? We've all seen a lot of information about automated vehicles and safety. Over the next 15, 20, 30 years, I think there'll be significant changes in how this works and the prevalence of it. And then finally, the Internet of Things and all the new technology, including smart signals, that can really make a difference for all modes. And that concludes my part of the presentation. I think the remainder is available for question and answer. And I'll stop sharing and I'll turn it back over to our moderators, Sarah, Melissa, and Dave.
Great, Martin. I think Sat Best has his hand up first and has a question for you. Can you unmute yourself, Sat?
I can. Thank you, Sarah. Martin, I would like to represent enthusiasm for grade-separated bike lanes. As I said in the last session that we had last week, to me, it seems that a bike lane at motor vehicle grade level in anything over 25 miles an hour is asking for trouble. When I think of the bike lane, for instance, on Butler, or bike lanes on Forest going over McMillan Mesa, you're having people going 10 miles an hour being passed by people driving 45 miles an hour. It just seems extremely unsafe. I would never consider being in those bike lanes. And I guess as I've thought about it a little more, it seems like we could just have an aspiration to get grade separated bike lanes out off of every street that's 25, that is greater than 25 miles an hour. So there would be a metric. I don't know why we couldn't just move the sidewalk out and try to go for a 10-foot wide sidewalk, which would be the same as a foots trail. And the foots trails, of course, have both pedestrians and bikes. I know that there's a challenge with the e-bikes. They can go 25 miles an hour. They're pretty fast. So we'd have to figure that one out. But I just think in the long run, it would be great to have an aspiration to make bikes safer and feel safer. And I see that we didn't have a death for a long time, but I can tell you, you get in one of those bike lanes and people are coming up behind you at 40, 45 miles an hour. It just does not feel safe. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for those comments, Sod. I will just mention that we are working on a bikeways plan that is really based on that principle of providing more separation between bikes and traffic. It is, as you say, aspirational. It's fairly easy for us to build a new configuration when we're building new streets or making significant improvements to existing streets, like Lone Tree, for example. It's more difficult and more expensive if we're trying to retrofit existing streets with new facilities. However, we're working out some of those things, seeing what we have for funding available, what it costs, what are the priorities, how do we make an entire system that's kind of interconnected and provides a good experience that makes it comfortable for cyclists, regardless of how much experience or what your ability level is. So look for that soon.
Great. Thank you very much, Martin.
Thank you, Sot. I think David Wessel has his hand up and would like to ask a question as well. Are you able to unmute, Dave?
I am, barely. Martin, excellent presentation as always. Just one comment and a couple questions. One, thanks for using blue and red instead of red and green. Appreciate that. And if you could clarify a couple things. So the 75 miles of missing bike lanes, those are just on major streets?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And is that centerline miles, or is that, 35? It's really 35 miles, but we've got bike lanes on both sides.
It's not centerline miles, it's bike lane miles. So it would be double centerline miles if it's missing on both sides.
Okay. And then you showed an image of the work from the Flagstaff Trails Initiative, and it gives the impression that it's only north of Flagstaff. Is that correct?
No, that was just a bias in the clip that I took from the map.
Okay, thank you.
It actually is. It has the same boundaries as Metro Plan.
Coincidence? I think not.
I think not.
I should add that is also the boundary of the regional plan. So this is our effort to stay coordinated. I have a question real quick, Martin, and then I think Mark Revis wants to go after. Could you really quickly talk about the active transportation master plan that you are working on for the city? It has an associated plan amendment, so it's amending our current regional plan. And talk about maybe the tie between those two documents and what you hope it'll mean for the regional plan update overall.
Sure. So I mentioned briefly the active transportation master plan is intended to be a guide for enhancing walking and biking in Flagstaff. And if you look at some of the policy documents that the city and the county and the region have created over the years, that there's pretty much universal support for walking and biking, but not a lot of details about how to become more walk friendly or bike friendly. So the ATMP is really intended to provide those details, that guidance and direction for being walkable and bikeable. And its relationship to the regional plan is that it begins with the goals and policies already in the regional plan that talk about walking or biking. It doesn't create anything new. It just provides more detail or more information to help implement the aspirations or the goals and policies that are already in the regional plan. Did that cover it, Sarah?
That did. Thank you. Is your comment period over for the regional plan amendment?
No, it 60 days. It technically goes through the end of this week, but I think we'll probably leave the survey open and accept comments for probably a few weeks after that.
Great, thank you. And Mark Revis has a question. Mark, can you unmute yourself?
Well, I have more of a comment on the graph that has Pullman and Moscow with the highest level of bike ped. They're heavily subsidized. The students in Pullman pay a fee for that. So I think we're doing pretty good in Flagstaff. You're right up toward the top. So I would put an asterisk by those two.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Both those towns are kind of much more dominated by the university than Flagstaff is.
Yeah, well, I was born there and I still have family there. And I know for sure that it's subsidized and it's expected that they have ridership. They take it as a student right. So, and they have a pretty good tracking system on where the buses are too. So
Yeah,
things to learn, but things to also acknowledge you're doing well.
Well, Martin, funding is kind of an ongoing discussion, both at the national, state, and local level for bike and ped improvements. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and give some context on Flagstaff and what we do fund and how funding might be being looked at in the future?
Sure. So we're in a good place in Flagstaff. In 2018, the voters extended the transportation sales tax. And over the next 20 years, actually beginning in 2020 through 2040, we will have approximately $29 million available for exclusively for pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. So a lot of the maps and a lot of the work that you saw on the slides today really relates to our efforts to prioritize and determine how best to spend that $29 million in funding. Right after we did that, I think just last year, Mountain Line applied for and received a federal grant for about $5.5 million for what are called first last mile projects. So facilities that get people to and from bus stops, and really that's walking and biking. So we have an additional, and they're working with us, but giving us the city a lot of latitude in how that money can be spent. So we have essentially an extra $5.5 million for pedestrian and bicycle facilities, as long as we can make that tie to transit. So $34.5 million over the next 20 years for ped and bike projects. If you follow current events, you've seen that I forget what the total number was for it, but an infrastructure bill was passed. I haven't seen any detailed analysis, but I'm guessing that there will be some opportunities for us for federal grants for implementing some of the ped and bike facilities that we have planned over the next several years as those grants are rolled out and that money becomes available. We're kind of watching that to see what our opportunities are, but I'm imagining that there will be more than a few.
Great. Are there any other questions before we thank Martin for allowing us to quiz him on camera? I don't see any more hands up, so I'm going to stop recording.